I was off work one night, relaxing at home. My roommate was out of town, and I'm a bit of a night owl, so I enjoyed staying up late. It was around 12 a.m., and I was sipping on a beer while watching TV. I heard a faint sound coming from above. At first, I ignored it. But after a few seconds, I realized it couldn't have been my roommate. I looked up at the ceiling, muted the TV, and tried to listen again. A few seconds passed, and there was nothing. The sound was so soft, and with the TV on, I wasn't sure what it was or where it came from. I considered getting up to investigate, but I was feeling lazy and not worried enough to bother. Instead, I opened the mini fridge, grabbed another beer, and took a few sips. Before I could unmute the TV, I heard the same thump sound above me. I looked up at the ceiling and heard subtle footsteps slowly walking in the room above. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that someone was in my apartment, upstairs. My body went numb. I got up from the couch, went to the stairs, and stood at the bottom. I could hear a thumping sound echoing through the hallway. I called out my roommate's name, knowing it couldn't be him, but hoping somehow it was. When there was no reply, I started scaling the stairs, flicking on the lights to the upstairs hallway. It was empty, but the door at the far end was open. It was my roommate's room, but I was sure I had closed it the day he left. I never went in there, so there was no reason for it to be open. My heart was pounding as I walked through the hallway and looked inside the room. It looked the same as when he left. Everything was clean and in place. I checked every room upstairs, but found nothing. I was starting to feel a sense of dread. Whoever was in my apartment was clearly trying to avoid being detected. They were moving quietly, cautiously, as if they were hunting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger, that I was being watched. I tried to calm myself down, to convince myself that I was overreacting. But the more I thought about it, the more questions arose. Who was in my apartment? What were they doing? Were they planning to harm me? The possibilities were endless, and each one was more terrifying than the last. I tried to focus on the present moment, to stay calm and alert. I knew that if I panicked, I would only make the situation worse. I needed to be prepared for anything. I didn't sleep that night and spent the next couple of days on edge, waiting for my roommate to get home. The experience had left me feeling shaken and vulnerable. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that I was no longer safe in my own home. The thought of the intruder lurking in the shadows, their intentions unknown, filled me with dread. I tried to distract myself, to focus on other things, but the fear was too strong. I couldn't stop replaying the events of that night in my mind, the sound of the footsteps above me, the feeling of being watched. It was a constant reminder of the danger that had lurked in my apartment, a danger that I had narrowly escaped. I was grateful that I had not confronted the intruder, that I had chosen to stay hidden and call the police. I knew that if I had confronted them, the outcome could have been very different. I could have been hurt, or even worse. The thought of what might have happened if I had not taken those precautions was terrifying. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that danger can lurk anywhere, even in the most seemingly safe places. It made me realize that I needed to be more vigilant, more aware of my surroundings. I needed to take steps to protect myself, to make my home more secure. I started by changing the locks on my doors and windows. I also installed a security system, complete with cameras and an alarm. I made sure to keep my doors locked at all times, even when I was home. I also avoided staying out late, especially if I was alone. Despite these precautions, I still felt a sense of unease. The memory of the intruder was still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they might return. I was constantly on edge, always looking over my shoulder, always expecting the worst. It took me a long time to recover from the ordeal. I sought counseling to help me cope with the trauma of the experience. I learned to manage my anxiety, to recognize the signs of stress, and to develop healthy coping mechanisms. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. It was a terrifying experience that has changed me in many ways. It has made me more cautious, more aware, and more resilient. It has taught me the importance of staying safe and the value of human connection. I went camping in Utah for a weekend getaway. It wasn't anything special. I hiked up to a small lake and planned to stay overnight. When I got there, it was more crowded than I'd hoped. There were two groups near the beach, but it wasn't too crowded. Around 5 p.m., both groups started packing up and left within the hour. With the beach to myself and an hour of sunlight left, I quickly changed into my swimsuit and jumped into the lake. I was only in there for about 10 minutes when I looked back at the campsite. The woods were calm, the sun was setting, but past the beach, a little ways into the forest, someone was watching me. They were too far away to see clearly, but it was definitely a man, and he was definitely looking at me. As soon as I caught him looking, he turned his head and walked further into the trees. It was creepy. Was it just a guy from one of the groups who forgot something? Or maybe a hiker I happened to catch looking at an awkward time? The way he just stopped and stared directly at me was unnerving. I walked back up to the beach and over to my tent. I dried off and kept my head on a swivel, scanning the forest for the man. I cooked a small meal and continued to look around for him. An hour passed, and there were no sightings. I figured I was good. I stayed up fairly late, at least a couple of hours after sunset, mostly looking up at the stars and resting. It sounds boring, but it's actually really nice. After a while, I got into my tent and laid on my sleeping mattress. The hike up must have made me tired because I fell asleep quickly. As soon as I woke up, I felt off. It was the middle of the night, pitch black inside the tent. All I could hear were insects chirping outside and a calm breeze blowing against the walls. I lay there for a while, my eyes open but unable to see anything. Then, my eyes started to adjust. I could see faint outlines of things inside my tent. As I moved my eyes around, they fell on the zipper. The tent flap was open, and between the opening was a shape. I stared at it for 4 or 5 seconds, my heart rate spiking. My vision became clear enough to make out a pair of eyes looking into mine. Adrenaline flooded through me, and my instincts took over. I grabbed my can of bear spray, shot it right at the opening, and yelled. I heard him yell and footsteps moving away from the tent. I started tearing up and coughing. I fumbled through my backpack to get my pocket knife, ready to fight for my life. But the man was gone. I didn't know which direction he went, but I didn't waste any time. The encounter had left me shaken and terrified. I was alone in the wilderness, vulnerable and exposed. The thought of the man lurking outside my tent, his intentions unknown, sent shivers down my spine. I tried to calm myself down, to focus on the present moment, but the fear was too strong. I knew that I had to get out of there, that I couldn't stay in the tent for another second. I gathered my things as quickly as I could, my hands trembling with fear. I used my handheld GPS to lead me back to the car, my eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the intruder. As I walked through the woods, I felt a sense of dread and vulnerability. I was at the mercy of the elements, and I was completely alone. I prayed that I would make it back to my car safely, that I would not be attacked again. I finally reached my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I drove away from the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the man standing there, but there was nothing. I was safe, for now. But the experience had left a lasting mark on me. I would never forget the fear, the terror, the feeling of being completely alone and helpless. It was a lesson in survival, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness. I called the police to report the incident, but they were unable to find any trace of the man. I gave them a detailed description of him and his van, but they had no leads. I was left feeling frustrated and helpless, but I knew that I had done everything I could. The memory of that night haunted me for weeks. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and I was constantly on edge. I was afraid to go outside, afraid to be alone. I felt like I was living in a constant state of fear. I sought counseling to help me cope with the trauma of the experience. I learned to manage my anxiety, to recognize the signs of stress, and to develop healthy coping mechanisms. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. It was a terrifying experience that has changed me in many ways. It has made me more cautious, more aware, and more resilient. It has taught me the importance of staying safe and the value of human connection. I called the police to come out and take me home because my eyes were burning from the bear spray. They didn't find anything, but I don't know how much they searched. Whoever that was and what they wanted, I honestly couldn't tell you. With the image of that guy staring into my tent burned into my head, I won't be camping again for a long time.